everyone, and welcome to That Is Not the Relevant Thing. Welcome to Groundwater Talk Live. I'm the groundwater guy, Tom Ballard, and today we're going to be talking about the Ogallala Aquifer and water crisis in Kansas. We often talk on this show about California water situation, which is kind of critical, and we have ignored to date a lot of the stuff that's going on in the central U.S., Midwest, and that is the place where we have the biggest aquifer in the United States and one of the largest in the world, the Ogallala Aquifer, which is part of the High Plains Aquifer System, and that is indeed undergoing a crisis, just like things in California. So we want to pay a little more attention to that as well. So what I want to do is, before we get going, just ask you to like, comment, share on these videos. It really helps get the word out. We got a growing viewership, and we're trying to push that up here and get the word out. And I always like hearing from folks anyway. But even if you can just like and share, that helps us get the word out, and that's all good. So I appreciate that. I do answer all comments, and also I'm always interested in suggestions on shows we can do and guests we can get on and things like that. So please like, comment, and share, and I appreciate it very much. All right, so let's get into it here, and so we're going to be looking at some news articles. We're going to start off with the drought map, like we always do. The drought has at least temporarily diminished in California. I'm not entirely convinced that it's gone, like a lot of the people in California think, especially the politicians. They don't have to worry about it, but it's certainly still ongoing in the Midwest. So let's start off looking at the U.S. Drought Monitor. This is a map that tracks drought conditions in the United States, and so we're going to look at that and see here. You can see that California, in and of itself, has pretty much out of drought conditions right now. They've got some record precipitation going on out there, and that's really and a record snowpack. So that's really helped push them out of drought conditions temporarily, except for some smaller spots down in the Mojave Desert area. So, however, the drought continues unabated in the Midwest and into Texas, as you can see here. So we have some pretty severe drought conditions centering mainly on Kansas, and that's something that's basically what we're going to look at here too. But so let's dive in a little deeper here, and you can see that that a lot of Kansas and the area that specifically coincides with the Ogallala Aquifer is in severe drought conditions, exceptional drought, D4, which is the highest drought category. And if we go back and extend down into the area of Texas, you can see that the Ogallala Aquifer actually extends down into Texas, and so we're seeing severe drought conditions in Texas as well. So the Midwest didn't get any of that relief really that California did. So we have a pretty severe drought that continues to impact things, and not only surface water but groundwater recharge to the aquifers that are already overdrafted. So let's look now at an article. This is from Scientific American back in 2009. They're talking about the Ogallala Aquifer and the crisis situation there. And actually, the overdraft really goes back to the 1940s and 1950s when center pivot irrigation, and that's a satellite map of, you can see all the little circles. That is all center pivot irrigation. And I might have a larger photo of that a little bit later too, but therein lies the culprit for depletion of the groundwater aquifer, because with the development of center pivot irrigation, what they do is they put a water well right at the center of these circles, and then they have a irrigation system. It's a long pipe that extends out from the well, and it just rotates around and sprinkles those crops in the circle. So that came in back in the 50s or so, and this is a lot of water being pumped there. So that is depleting the aquifer. It's a huge aquifer, and we'll look at the stats here next on that. But really, that much pumping is going to deplete any aquifer. Um, so so they talk about this back in 2009, and it's only getting worse since then. They talk about this 800-mile expanse of agriculture looks like it could go on forever, but it can't, because there are limits to any aquifer, even an aquifer as huge as the Ogallala Aquifer. So they talk about this is really the breadbasket of America. So with California producing a lot of agricultural products, and this area in the country, and depleted groundwater resources in both areas, we might be facing some serious food challenges as we go along here too. So they talk about how the Ogallala Aquifer extends underneath 8 states from South Dakota to Texas. Huge aquifer. A little bit about the conservation, and they talk about going back into the 1950s when they started doing this irrigation, and like so many people back then, they thought that the water was inexhaustible, but we know there are finite limits to every resource, and so they kind of go through the history here, and then talk about, and then they get into tapping the aquifer. It's so they talk a little bit about the characteristics of the aquifer, and I'll go through that in a little more detail. I just wanted to go through this article here and see that even 2009, they're really talking about how critical this nature is, and it's only gotten worse since then. Now we'll talk a little bit about some conservation measures that have been put in, but the efficiency of the pumps and the wells, and the ease of drilling the wells out there has really contributed to the problem, and just we have plentiful water, so we're going to irrigate and produce all this food without a regard to recharge in the aquifer, and that's always the key, is the water balance in any aquifer, the water that's going in versus the water that's going back out. And the Ogallala Aquifer recharges very slowly. So you're taking out water at a dramatically higher rate than it's going back in. Of course, you're going to get depletion, even in an aquifer that's as substantial as the Ogallala Aquifer. So let's kind of move on from here. This is a long article. This is the Scientific American from 2009. So what I wanted to do is look at some of the characteristics of the aquifer, and really a good summary, kind of written for the general public, but it's a decent summary, is in Wikipedia. So I took this article here, and there are some good pictures in here that we'll go over in a minute, but I just wanted to go over some facts here. So I downloaded it in reader format. So let's just kind of go through that, and kind of look at some of the characteristics of the Ogallala Aquifer. There's some maps here, and I'll blow these up and do that. But some of the things that you should take away, and the audience here is probably aware of this, but I do spend a lot of time on California stuff, so I wanted to give some background and characteristics of the Ogallala Aquifer. So it's one of the world's largest aquifers, underlies an area of approximately 174,000 square miles. That's bigger than any aquifer in California, which is what we talk about most. Covers portions of 8 states: South Dakota, Nebraska, Wyoming, Colorado, Kansas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and into Texas also. So that's a huge area, and you can see in this map here basically the where the Ogallala Aquifer lies. 27% of the irrigated land, the entire United States lies over the aquifer, which yields about 30% of the groundwater used for irrigation in the United States. These are huge numbers, actually, when you look at it. So when you compare it to California, that we talk about a lot, these are really big numbers. So I apologize for ignoring the Ogallala Aquifer for so long. We need to look at that a little more because it is every bit as at risk as anything that's going on in California and some other parts of the United States that are being overpumped and overdrafted. So the aquifer is at risk of overextraction and pollution. Since 1950, agricultural irrigation has reduced the saturated volume of the aquifer by an estimated 9%. And that's only accelerating in recent years. It actually is going down in some places. So that is actually good as they recognize conservation measures come into place. Tentative steps, yes, but at least in some places we're seeing this depletion of the aquifer slowing down a little bit. So, and they point out here, once depleted, the aquifer will take over 6,000 years to replenish naturally through rainfall. That's kind of a squishy number, just depending on projecting normal rainfall and a totally depleted aquifer. Now, an aquifer such as the Ogallala, which is a bedrock type of aquifer in sandstones, it tends to the mineral structure tends to collapse down a little bit, so you never get back what you gave up when you dewater that aquifer. So these are squishy numbers, but it is serious because once you start to break down that mineral skeleton that holds the aquifer open, you're not going to be able to replenish it at the same rate. It's not going to have the same storage capacity. So this is important to take into consideration also. Another thing is the aquifer supplies drinking water to 82% of the 2.3 million people, according to the 1990 census, who live within the boundaries of the High Plains study area. So that's so drinking water, irrigation water, a lot of demands on the Ogallala Aquifer. So some of the general characteristics they talk in this is from the Wikipedia article, so you can look that up if you're interested in all the details. I'm trying to hit some of the highlights, but the depth of the Ogallala varies with the shape of then prevailing surface, being deepest where it fills ancient valleys and channels. Consists mostly of sedimentary rocks in its deeper sections, which transition upward into finer grained materials, so a fine sandstone or even silts and clays is really the upper part of that. So the higher yielding parts of the aquifer tend to be a little deeper. So the water saturated thickness of the Ogallala Formation ranges from a few feet to more than 1,000 feet. Its deepest part is 1,200 feet and is generally greater in the northern plains. So the northern part of the aquifer tends to be a little deeper. The depth of the water below surface of the land is what we would call static water level, ranges, or the groundwater table, if you will. In a well, we'd call that the static water level. So the depth of the water below the surface of the land ranges from almost 400 feet in parts of the north to between 100 and 200 feet throughout much of the south. So the groundwater levels tend to be a little shallower in the south. So that comports with what we talked about here earlier. So present day recharge of the aquifer of fresh water occurs at an exceedingly slow rate. So this is part of the problem. Water coming out faster than it's going back in, and that results in a deficit in the water balance. So we're seeing the water levels decline in the aquifer and the storage decline. So this suggests that much of the water in its pore spaces is paleo water, dating back to the most recent ice age and probably earlier. So this, when you use that water up, it's not going in back very fast, and so we're using up paleo water basically, and it's going to take a long time to replenish that. Even if you take the 6,000 year calculation, that's a long time, even if we stop, pumping water right now. So, groundwater within the Ogallala generally flows from west to east at an average rate of 1 foot per day. Hydraulic conductivity, or the ability for a fluid to move through porous space, so that's hydrogeological factor, ranges from 25 to 300 feet per day. So that's the calculated value. So water quality varies a little bit, obviously, across the aquifer. But what I wanted to talk about here was the aquifer water balance. So the USGS in 2005 estimated that total water storage was about 2.9 billion, I believe that's billion, yeah, billion acre feet. So an acre feet is around 800,000 cubic feet. Uh, so it's or gallons. So that's if I have my calculations right, I'm drawing a blank on that. But that's a lot of water. An acre foot is actually uh, the volume of water it takes to fill 1 acre to a depth of 1 foot. So you can see that 2.9 billion acre feet is a lot of water. So. However, withdrawals from the Ogallala Aquifer for irrigation, and this is including drinking water, amounted to 21 million acre feet in 2000. So that's a pretty significant amount of the water that's in storage that's being pulled out every year. Since major groundwater pumping began in the late 1940s, overdraft from the High Plains Aquifer and the High Plains Aquifer system, it should say, the Ogallala is part of that. There's a number of other aquifers in there, the Fox Hills and some other aquifers that are in there that are part of this whole High Plains system. So this isn't totally attributable to the Ogallala, but the Ogallala is certainly the biggest aquifer in the High Plains aquifer system. So that amounted to 332 million acre feet. So since 1940, so 85% of the volume of Lake Erie, just for comparison purposes. So a lot of water has been pulled out since 1940, and so you can see why we'd run into having problems with our water balance. It's going back in at a much slower rate than that. So and the rate it's going in, groundwater recharge in the aquifer ranges from 0.024 inches per year in parts of Texas and New Mexico to 6 inches in south central Kansas. So huge difference there in different parts of the aquifer, depending on the arid nature of where you're at. So, but a lot of this part of the Midwest could really be classified as a desert. Fortunately, you have this huge aquifer down there, but and that's enabled a lot of farming to take place. But if you just when the original settlers came out here, they pretty much considered this a desert because it was. So it was only through development of groundwater wells and the center pivot irrigation system dating back to the 40s and 50s that this area really thrived as far as an agricultural region. So let's look at groundwater discharge. The regions overlying the Ogallala Aquifer are some of the most productive regions in the United States for ranching livestock, growing corn, wheat, soybeans. The success of large-scale farming in areas that do not have adequate precipitation and do not always have perennial surface water for diversion has depended heavily on pumping groundwater for irrigation. If you do not have adequate precipitation for these types of crops and you don't have the surface water, then where are you going to turn? You're going to turn to groundwater. And back in the 1940s, if you think that you have an inexhaustible reservoir of groundwater down there, then it seems like the prudent thing to do. And they talk a little bit here about the early settlers were plagued by crop failures due to cycles of drought. The center pivot irrigation system and the water wells out there changed everything for this area. So. All right, so a little bit on change in groundwater storage. At places, the water table was measured to drop more than 5 feet per year at the time of maximum extraction. In extreme cases, the deepening of wells was required to reach the steadily falling water table. This is a common characteristic in areas where aquifers are being depleted, is you have to keep deepening your wells and chasing that water downward. Now, of course, there's a limit. There's going to be a limit to that. How deep can you go? Especially if you have a domestic well, you're not drilling 2,000-foot domestic wells. So this is in a lot of cases. So chasing groundwater ever deeper, probably not the answer. Generally, deeper groundwater in some of these basins is going to be poorer water quality. You tend to accumulate a lot of salts and have high TDS water and to the point of being undrinkable in some of the deeper levels. So there's a limit to how deep you can go on these things. So that's kind of what that's pointing out here. So water conservation practices, terracing and crop rotation, more efficient irrigation methods, center pivot and drip, and reduced area under irrigation have helped slow depletion of the aquifer, but levels are generally still dropping in the area, including southwestern Kansas and the Texas Panhandle. In other areas, such as parts of eastern and central Nebraska and the region south of Lubbock, Texas, water levels have risen since 1980. So some of these conservation measures have helped, and we see that it's possible that water levels are coming back up in some areas of the aquifer, but the heavily farmed areas, the heavily pumped areas such as southwestern Kansas, Texas Panhandle are still seeing pretty significant drops in the aquifer levels. So center pivot irrigation was described as the villain in a 2013 New York Times article, and it is true that it makes it pretty easy to extract that groundwater. I think that's mostly it. So since the 1940s, pumping from the Ogallala has drawn the aquifer down by more than 300 feet in some areas. So you can see that if you have a relatively shallow groundwater well, that if the aquifer drops by more than 300 feet, you're probably going to need to deepen some of those wells and chase that water downwards, which like I say, there's limits on that. So I think that's mostly what I had here. Yeah, just one last thing here. The U.S. Geological Survey determined that the water level in the aquifer had dropped more in Texas than any other state in the basin. So Kansas tends to pump more water, but it's the aquifer is a little more substantial there. Texas has seen the most dramatic drops in the aquifer, the water levels. So I think that's basically that. Let's look at some maps real quick here, and yeah, let's look at that. So we'll look at the maps here. This is this is saturated thickness in 1997. So you can see the highest saturated thicknesses in the Ogallala Aquifer, and this is the Ogallala Aquifer, or the High Plains Aquifer, I guess. So it's generally equivalent to the Ogallala, but there are some other aquifers included. So you can see the saturated thickness of the High Plains Aquifer system, including the Ogallala, greatest in Nebraska, and you see some thicknesses kick back up in Oklahoma, Texas Panhandle, and southwestern Kansas. So that's you're seeing in that part central to western Nebraska, you're seeing 1,000 to 1,200 feet of aquifer thickness there. So pretty substantial saturated zone in the aquifer in there. So this shows water level changes from 1980 to 1995. So you can see we have some areas down here in eastern Nebraska and in Texas. I believe that's around the Lubbock area, where you're seeing some water levels rising, 20 to 40 inches in some cases. So that's good. In the interior of the aquifer, we're seeing some areas where you're getting more than 40 inches of decline in 15 years. So that's you know, going on almost 4 feet of decline in some of these darker areas here. And the really dark areas are where you have little saturated thickness there. So we're looking at the area in Kansas and an area down here in Texas where you're seeing almost 4 feet of decline just in 15 years. So that's a pretty substantial rate of decline. This is once again withdrawal rates, and you can see they kind of have it broken down in these squares here. So millions of gallons per mile squared per year. So you can see that obviously Nebraska, you got some pretty good withdrawals. Texas and then southwestern Kansas again, you have your highest withdrawal rates. So kind of through this agricultural belt here, and then up into Nebraska is where you have your highest withdrawal rates. What else do we have here? This is that nice picture of the center pivot irrigation. Every one of those circles out there has this is roughly 557 square miles, I guess, from satellite photography. Every one of those circles has a well at its center with a center pivot irrigation system. So that's a lot of straws in the aquifer. So you can start to see where the problem might lie when you have this intensity of water wells that are constantly pumping and irrigating the crops. So pretty dramatic picture actually. And then this is well, this is showing where the Keystone Pipeline. I don't think that's really relevant to this discussion, so I'm probably not going to go through that. People are worried that the Keystone Pipeline, which has actually been canceled, would cause problems. I mean, actually, there are some sections that have been already built through Kansas, but the proposed sections would go over the aquifer, but that's really not a consideration in this discussion here. So let's move on a little bit. This is an article from Topeka. Sorry about that. Capital Journal talking about some of the conservation measures. They like a lot of these stories do, they put the human interest angle in here. So they're talking about a couple farmers here, and so they are talking about that they didn't get a warm welcome because they're from out of the state, but they came up with some ideas on conservation here. So irrigation restrictions is really what it comes down to. So restricting the amount you can irrigate. Now, this kind of forces moving to some different crops, and so moving to dryland farming, some things like that. So it's and they talk a little bit here again about the history, and you can see this map here, which is a little hard to see. I don't think I can really blow that up. Is irrigated land in Kansas from 1940 to 2010. And then the aquifer, the Ogallala Aquifer's boundary is in the dark lines here. So you can see a fair amount, and along the rivers here is generally where you get a lot of the irrigation, and then over the aquifer where you can do the center pivot irrigation. So they're saying that roughly a third of the water under Kansas has disappeared. That number might be disputable, but it's certainly approaching that. So. And in parts of southwest Kansas, more than half of the aquifer supply is already gone. These are serious numbers when you think about it. What's the future hold here? So a lot of agriculture out there. It's going to require a shift. So getting to the point here is irrigation technology has come a long way over the past century. Where farmers used to guess how much water is there, now it's a lot more scientific, and they can dial that in. So we can move to things like drip irrigation or customizing the irrigation for the crops you have, making it a little more efficiency so you don't get a lot of evaporation, and using that water more efficiently. So that's really what people are pushing for. So they say here, if the average farmer in Sheridan County got water use by 1 inch across 1,610 acres of irrigated cropland, it would save over 43 million gallons of water. So that is significant. So it's being a little more scientific about it, and using your water more wisely instead of just you know the center pivot irrigations. They're efficient from the standpoint of pumping the water and getting it on the crops, but because you're using these sprinkler systems rotating on a pivot, is that you're getting a lot of evaporation. That water's never hitting the crops. So being a little more scientific about it and getting water to the crops is really going to be the future of things. So we're probably going to be seeing less center pivot as time goes on, and or at least making those systems a little more efficiently. So there are some incentives for making changes in some of these districts. Not a lot of money, but the Sheridan County obviously forced farmers to cut back irrigation by 20%. So, but they kind of found a way. I mean, when you're incentivized to do that by being forced to cut back, they actually end up decreasing their water use by 31%. So that was, I wouldn't say easy, but not as hard as they'd probably anticipated. So you're seeing that it is possible, and you can really slow down the rates of depletion by really looking at these things and applying when you're forced to do it instead of taking the easy water. And I think everybody is getting the picture out there, is that that water conservation is important for the future of the area. So, and they make the point here, instead of bragging about bushels per acre, now they're talking about how many bushels per inch of water that they got. So it's almost like a little challenge going on here. So that how efficient can you be, and that's good because people are looking at things in the right way in that case. So let's see what else we got here. Dry land farming is another option. It uses soil moisture, and so that's going to be more things like wheat and stuff that are conducive to dry land farming. You just can't go and plant crops that are very moisture intensive, that require a lot of water, such as hydration heavy crops like corn, for ones that require less water, such as cotton and sorghum. So they're looking at the types of crops, and that is good too, because in parts of the country, and California is guilty of this too, is that they're growing crops that should never be there because they require a lot more water than some other crops, so we don't want to do that. I mean, we just need to have crops that are suitable for the area, that are a little more water efficient. So there may be parts of the country and world where you got enough water where you can grow those crops, but growing water heavy crops in Kansas, maybe not, maybe not. So that's kind of the gist of that article. They're talking a little bit about how some of these farmers are going about it, making it a competition almost. So that's good. They're thinking conservation minded, because if they don't, we're still seeing depletion in the aquifer, obviously. But if we can slow that down, then perhaps we can get to the point where we can get to a water balance that actually balances, and that is the goal. But it's going to take a long time to get there. All right, so let's look at this one here. This article is from 2021, I think, or 2022, actually. Grab a quick drink here. Kansas Geological Survey report indicates 2021 drained Kansas groundwater levels. So this just goes through their findings. The Kansas Geological Survey findings found that groundwater levels have dropped by over a foot in western and central Kansas, and that once again is alarming. We did look at those numbers there, and so that's important to note is that water levels continue to drop. So that's basically just in 1 year over a foot. So you start to project that out, and you can see this is huge problems. And as we pointed out, the biggest declines were in the southwestern part of the state. Interestingly enough, Kansas Department of Agriculture Division of Water Resources measures about 1,400 wells annually to track the health of the High Plains Aquifer system. And so that's a lot of monitoring wells and a lot of data. So they get a fairly precise look at this, which is what's important because if you got a problem like this and you're monitoring the situation and you don't have enough data points to really monitor it, then it becomes a guessing game and you're not really doing much good. You got to have data in order to come up with a plan to manage these things properly. So 1,400 wells is actually a pretty good monitoring network. And so kudos on Kansas Department of Agriculture for having such a monitoring system. The USGS also has monitoring systems throughout the United States, and probably not as many wells here, but you tie those things together, and we can start to get a picture. And having the data is what you need before you can really start managing the problem. You got to see where the problem is, what the problem is, and then come up with plans to manage it from there. That all takes data and input. So you can't calculate a water balance in the aquifer unless you know what the aquifer stores, what the water levels are doing, what the inputs are, the outputs. So that's all data that you need to come up with your water balance equation. And then you start working backwards from there to try to cut the outputs to balance what the inputs are. The other part of the equation you can mess with, obviously, and I haven't seen much in Kansas, but artificial aquifer recharge. I'm sure some of that stuff must be going on, but I couldn't really find anything about that. But so that's the other way you can mess with the water balance equation is by putting in having more inputs into the aquifer through artificial recharge. Now that water's got to come from somewhere to recharge the aquifer. So the question is, where do you get that? And but both sides of the equation need to balance out. Right now, the outputs way outbalance the inputs, and therefore your storage, which is in the middle, affected by that whole equation, is going down, and that's of serious concern. So, the university said in 2021, the 2021 decline of about a foot followed an overall drop of almost a foot in 2020, so which was another unusually dry year. We can expect similar numbers this year also because you saw the drought map earlier. So it's probably going to remain that way. So they talk a little bit about the background here. What else do we have? Southwest Kansas, particularly, average groundwater levels dropped 2.17 feet in 2021. So largest drop in the region since 2013 when they fell 2.43. So you start to add these numbers up, and you can see that yeah, we are chasing the groundwater deeper, and that's a serious situation. So dry conditions prevalent in the west central and northwest parts of the state. So that's basically it here. I wanted to just kind of show you that they are studying these things. There are some well networks out there, and the point is that the data is really important to get your arms around the problem. You can't address the problem without the data. So, all right, let's look at this article here from NPR in Kansas City. So with the Ogallala Aquifer drying up, Kansas ponders limits to irrigation. So they're looking at putting limits on irrigation. This would be similar to what California is doing with their Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. So here's another way of looking at things. Water levels in the Ogallala Aquifer continue to plummet as farm irrigation swallows an average of more than 2 billion gallons of groundwater per day statewide. So when you look at that, billions of acre feet that we have out there, and you're pumping out 2 billions of gallons of groundwater per day statewide, you can start to see why you're depleting things. Advertisement. But after decades of mostly inaction from Kansas leaders, the politicians, the state's approach to water conservation might finally be starting to shift. And this is the same problem you see in California. The politicians think in 2-year election cycles, and they just kind of keep their fingers crossed that maybe the drought will go away and things will change, and they kick the can down the road until they can't anymore, and now they're faced with really doing something about it. So unfortunately, the political leadership is an impediment to coming up with a solution. And I think a lot of the farmers are coming around to understanding the situation, realizing that their longevity really depends on applying conservation measures, and their game on that for the most part. It's the political solutions. I personally think that it's more of a market solution than a political solution. So you really want the farmers to agree amongst themselves to conserve water and how they're going to do that. And that's probably a better solution than having a political solution that's always convoluted and needs multiple amendments to make it work, and it never works quite right. And so I prefer market-based solutions and the solutions with the people managing the water themselves, because they're understanding now how important this is. So that's kind of the gist of the article here. Let's see, what else do we have? We got, they're looking again here at interpolated changes in feet, cooperative water level measurement. So you can see where data is helpful to us. This map, and I can't blow that up, I'm afraid, but this map actually, maybe I can. So let's try this here. Where is it? Yeah, I can blow that up a little bit. So you can see that all these little dots here are part of their monitoring network. So you can see where we're getting the declines. You wouldn't know that without the data. So that's really important. Is that we look at this, and let me see if I can blow that up a little more even. So you can start to see where the problems are, start to focus your solutions on those problems, and get this out to the farmers so they understand what the situation is, and the farmers will work on solutions. They understand that they got to take a hit in the short term to create long-term sustainability. So this is important, actually. So having the data is key. And so that's basically the gist of this article. It goes on to talk, here in Kansas again, where the water's disappeared. So decline in aquifer thickness. Some places 100%, but that's where the aquifer is really thin. So 80%, 76% decline. You get out into the major parts of the, you're seeing some substantial declines in the aquifer. So, and they talk about how they got there, and the pumping and that. So, this is good. There's a bill in the legislature to keep water conservation decisions in the hands of local groundwater districts, which recognize how the aquifer's depth and capacity and the potential solutions to preserve it vary widely from one area to another. But it would force those districts to crack down harder. So it's good because the local people and the farmers need to work together to really come up with solutions that are going to be workable. Legislative solutions for problems that really deal with technology and things like this rarely tend to be really workable without a lot of fixing. So that's why I'm a big fan of market-based solutions rather than political solutions. You got to have some political pressure. I recognize that, but it really, but you're not going to get the solutions if you're dragging people kicking and screaming. You want them to work on the solutions and be on board with the solutions. And if they're part of the planning process and can come up with solutions as part of a team, then you're going to get more of these farmers buying in and going gung ho on this. And I think that's important. So they're talking a little bit about the legislative history, and we don't need to dive into that too much. But I really wanted to point out that the once again, it depending on what part of the country you're in, it really doesn't matter. Politicians are the same everywhere. They think in short-term solutions, trying to get reelected, and that's you're dealing with politicians deal with short-term solutions for long-term problems. That is not a good combination, and I've made that point before, and I'll make it again, and I'll probably make it again down the road. But that's important. So they do talk about when farming is already a risky, expensive operation. Many farmers are hesitant to try something new. That is true, but if they understand their motivation for doing that, they're probably gonna come along. I mean, farmers are slow to adopt things, but they will come along. So that is the gist of that article. I got a couple more. This is just probably the same thing. This is the University of Kansas website that we just talked about. It has the same map here. And so University of Kansas is really working on this, and that's pretty much the same data, I think. So so they go over that, but it is being looked at scientifically, and so there are teams of people looking at the problem and coming up with potential solutions. But once again, I would just reiterate, like I just said, you got to have the farmers and the people actually using the water for their crops on board. So you got to have a solution that brings these people in and makes them part of the solution instead of dictating to them what they need to do. You're going to have a far more efficient and workable solution if you have everybody involved. And it's a lot of the political process. They talk about stakeholders all the time, and you get these stakeholders that are in these environmental groups, and they have all these wish lists and stuff. But a lot of times the farmers kind of get lost in that process, and that's really who we're talking about. They're the ones producing the food, and they get overwhelmed by all these stakeholders that say they understand things, and they talk in all these arm wavy terms, but they aren't as fully invested in the land as the farmers who are out there farming it. So that's really important, is that you listen to the farmers, make them part of the solution instead of beating up on them. That's my point there. And lastly, this is a little bit more of the same. It's talking about this political solution. Groundwater recharge and sustainability project helps two western Kansas communities addressing declining aquifer. This is I was talking about aquifer recharge projects. Sometimes it's called MAR, or Managed Aquifer Recharge. So it's really an effort. They're making some baby steps in Kansas in a couple communities to address the declining aquifer by doing some recharge projects. So this is good. You can see they're doing it through some playa lakes. So they're putting water in these lakes, allowing it to recharge the shallow aquifer anyway. I don't think they're actually doing any drilling, so it would not be a true managed aquifer recharge. But it's a start. They're starting to look at this stuff, and I think that's what's important, and seeing what works. So restoring playa lakes, reducing irrigation water usage, and retiring irrigation water rights. So these are unused water rights that they're taking out of the market, and so tightening up the market to people who are only actually using water. That'll help a little bit. Getting the farmers on board with reducing irrigation water usage, that's going to be, primarily a the types of crops you plant, and a technological solution, and then the aquifer recharge component through these playa lakes where it's important, or where they're available to do this. So that's kind of that. We're not seeing any actual recharge wells, which I would really like to see, because that can help speed up the aquifer recharge much quicker than these playa lake situations. But it's anything you can do to start looking at recharging the aquifers, and at least they're starting to think about that here. So. So this is water quality and best management practices, how you're applying fertilizer. This is a water quality issue, burning practices. These are some things that can affect it, but it's not the storage. So I think that's mainly what I was looking at here is the recharge and these playa lake recharge projects that really are an important part of the process, and they're starting to look at recharge projects. They need to move that along a little more quickly, but at least they're making baby steps in that direction. Will it be enough? We tend to wait till it's too late a lot of times. So that is that's the problem. Is we got severe situations going on in Kansas. We really have a water crisis in Kansas, especially. That extends down into Texas too. And as the longer the drought goes on there, the worse it's going to get. With overpumping, but there are some baby steps being made in the right direction. But with so many places, and like I talk about so often with California, is it too little too late? Are we making some progress? Are we finally getting to the root of the situation and coming up with some solutions? And will we get those solutions in place in time to avoid totally depleting the aquifer? This is a critical question throughout the United States, through the Midwest into the West. Are we doing enough, and do we have to? I mean, what happens when we get to the point where you have 75%, 80% aquifer depletion, and there really is, no water, and the water that's left is all high TDS water. So that's the situation we're approaching. So some of these, we really need to pick up the pace of the market-based solution, and I think people are coming on board with that. But I think there's some innovation in the irrigation practices and really looking at what crops you grow. So we're making progress. Is it too little, too late? Do we need to pick that up? We do. Is it too little, too late? Time will tell, but I'm hopeful that it'll turn the tide. We may not get these aquifers back to the way they were back in the 1940s. Almost certainly that is not going to happen. But if we get to the point where we can manage aquifer inputs and outputs, where those are balanced, we can at least maintain what we have. And then the next step after that would be to start working on shifting that balance so that there's more water going into the aquifer than is coming out. That's going to take some time, and it's going to take some data. We need to have the data to understand. Water balance calculations, inputs and outputs seem to be relatively straightforward. It is not. It's a very complicated process to do that. So we have to have data, but do we have the time to gather all this data and then make some decisions? The answer is no. We need to work on this right now. So that is the show for today. You can reach me at groundwaterguy.com or tballard@groundwaterguy.com. I'm always happy to hear from folks and suggestions on future shows. If you want to be a guest on Groundwater Talk Live, if you want to talk about any of these things, this is my Book Me page. You can come on the show. I'd be happy to have you. I'm going to next month try to get back into having more guests, so you don't have to listen to me talk all the time. But ring me up on this page and let's talk groundwater. All right, we stream on the Groundwater Guy YouTube channel. All our past shows are up there. We have about 80 videos up there now. So there's something for everybody there. I also stream live on LinkedIn.com when it lets me. LinkedIn is the glitchiest of platforms, but I never seem to quite get it right. But I try to stream on LinkedIn.com. Let me put it that way. I do post my the link to the YouTube videos up there also. So if the stream doesn't work, then the videos will be there under my profile. So we also stream into Facebook and Twitch also. I'm not sure how well the word gets out on those. So those are the two main ones. Okay, so thank you for watching. We do this every week, Thursdays at 11 a.m. Central Time, 9 a.m. Pacific Time. Don't forget to subscribe to the Groundwater Guy YouTube channel. Hit the alert button if you want to know when a new video comes out. But there are plenty of videos there to sort through. And once again, hit me up with some comments. I'm happy to chat with you about that, and I appreciate that. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.